Hello, everyone. Welcome. Let me bring my guest up as well. There we go. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And joining me is the author of The Golden Albatross, Grumpus Maximus. Grumpus, how are you doing tonight?
I'm great, Rob. How are you?
I'm great. I guess it's not night for you, right? It's like early morning where you are?
It's 11:05 here in the morning.
New Zealand. That's on my list. That's one of my places I want to go to.
Well, I can definitely recommend it if you ever get here.
Yes, it's one of those ones that's like that's a slow travel trip when that's going to happen, because that's a long plane ride otherwise.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. Thank you, everyone who's watching, for joining us. We are here to talk tonight about pensions, and specifically for teachers. Now, there is a ton of overlap between pensions for, let's say, teachers, other public servants, military. Like, there's probably a lot of stuff that is going to be applicable to you if you are not a teacher and you have a pension. But tonight is going to be specifically about teachers in terms of the questions that we try and answer. And then Grumpus is going to do plenty of follow-up events with different groups. I know there's a military webinar that's on the books at some point to happen. So certainly if you know anyone who is military and has questions about their pension, that will be the opportune time to get those questions answered. But for now, if you have anything that you would love to have answered tonight, please put it in the chat so that we can actually get that question answered for you. So if you're on Facebook, if you leave a comment, that will show up for us. If you're on YouTube, same thing, leave a comment and that will pop up in our live chat so we can see who's asking what and how it's going. So George, thank you so much for saying hi. Adventures on Vancouver Island. That just sounds like a really interesting screen name. I want to know more. But retired at age 30.
I saw the same thing.
Retired at age 30 after working as an RN. I'm playing with my tools as well, guys, for 8 years and investing in real estate. Sounds awesome. And then saving on your own is better than defined pension plan. Okay, so that's going to be pretty much one of our questions tonight. Is that the case? Should we address the pension? Like for me, like I know when I planned my FI number, I pretty much ignored my pension because I was like, I don't know enough about this to even account for it in my numbers. And I was like, is it like Social Security where there's a massive question mark over whether it's going to be there or not? So I'm hoping to learn a lot about pensions tonight as well. I'm definitely not going to be one of our experts in the room. That is going to be solely on Grumpus, but I am here to facilitate that conversation and help you all get your questions answered. So just to reintroduce myself, my name is Rob Phelan. I work with ChooseFI and ChooseFI Foundation. So I'm part of the curriculum writing team over at ChooseFI Foundation. We have a pre-K through 12 personal finance curriculum that is just freely available for all teachers, parents, homeschool educators, anybody who wants to use it basically can use it. It's also the home of FI 101, our self-paced adult course to teach you all the basics of personal finance. There's a small mention about pensions in there, but I want to say it's a little bit more of a niche topic. So it's not one of the ones that you'll see covered a ton in mainstream personal finance podcasts or on blogs. So that's why I'm really excited to have like a niche expert in here tonight to talk about it. Grumpus, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What we're allowed to know? It's a very secret identity.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry about the secret identity, but when I started blogging, I was still on active duty military, and I've just kept it since. But I'm Grumpus Maximus. Obviously, that is not my original name. That's my social media name and my author name. And I write about defined benefit pensions in the FI space. So as far as I know, I am the only dedicated blogger / author to write about pensions in the FI space. I've been doing it since about 2017. My FI journey started well before that, though, as I taught myself all the ins and outs of my pension as I was going through a decision around year 16, year 17 in my military career as to whether or not I should gut it out for the final 3 or 4 years in the military. And so I have taken everything I've learned during that, as well as since then, and tried to either write about it or blog about it, and also talk about it on podcasts like this.
All right. So I think a lot of teachers, even in that small piece of story, is probably going to relate to what you're saying with the I'm 16 years in, or maybe you're 6 months in. I mean, it depends on the teacher. And you're like, I don't know if I can stick this thing out for the full ride. So like, what was the, I guess, decision making? What was the problem at year 16? Like, why were you kind of thinking like, maybe not? Was it, dissatisfaction with job? Is it something else? Like, I would love a little bit more on that backstory if you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suffered a mental breakdown at year 16 of my military career due to post-traumatic stress. Anxiety and depression were my main two symptoms, and that forced me to get help. And during the process of getting help, the big question mark came up as to whether or not I could continue to perform in the high-stress environment that was the U.S. military and still is the U.S. military today. And so, as a result, I had to navigate trying to figure out all the ins and outs of my pension, whether or not it was worth it. At the same time, I dealt with mental health care for the first time in my life. So that was an experience that I didn't necessarily want other people to have to go through. And a friend convinced me to start blogging about what I had learned in the process, she had actually gone through something very similar to me in a pensionable job as well, a high-stress pensionable job. So the backstory is I come from a place where I felt like I was completely on my own doing these two things, both navigating mental health as well as navigating a worth versus worth it decision of trying to determine if staying for my pension was worth it. Now, I ultimately decided to stay. That it's going to be a personal decision everybody makes. I don't advocate either way. What I do advocate is a decision that's knowledge based, which is my mission, is to try and educate people as much as possible about their pensions. As you mentioned in your intro there, some people, they like you can't figure out how to value their pension, so they don't include it in their FI plans. And that could potentially doom them to working longer than necessarily, because they may think they need to grow a bigger nest egg than what would be required otherwise if they knew whether or not they could rely on their pension coming through. So that's some of my backstory right there.
Yeah, and I think like that last point you said about staying too long is something I think people are often guilty of anyway, even when they know all their finances. They're like, I'll do another year. Let's pad this nest egg a little bit more. And yeah, I feel like I could end up really overshooting what I need to do. And I was a teacher. I still am a teacher. I'm sorry. I work as a high school personal finance and math teacher, and I'm going into year 8. And it's definitely at that point where I'm like, I love teaching. I love what I do, but do I see myself teaching till I'm 60? Probably not. So then that question for me, is, does my pension give me anything? Do I lose all of it? Do I just get what I put in back? Like, I definitely have, lots of questions about pensions. And I know a lot of the teachers I talk to, both like that I work with directly and through groups like ChooseFI educators, have very similar questions. It's not very clear. It's not something that we get as part of personal finance education if you do get it. And then most of us aren't getting it at all. So I think it's one of those kind of mystic things that sort of took care of our parents and grandparents when they had one, and it might take care of us, it might not. So definitely want to get into all of that tonight. Can we start with the basics? What is a pension?
So I think it's best to say that when we're talking about pensions, we are specifically talking about defined benefit pensions. That is typically what most people mean when they say pension. There are some other places in the world where pension means something slightly different, but in this case, defined benefit pensions in the U.S. is typically what people refer to as a pension. Now, a defined benefit pension is a type of deferred retirement compensation. The former employer pays the retired worker an annuity for the remainder of their life after they retire and reach the age where the pension starts paying out. A defined benefit pension, its purpose for employers is to retain workers, right? Mm-hmm. To keep them in a job for a long time. Thus, the deferred part, the payments at the end of your work, as opposed to during your work lifespan, which is what 401ks and 403bs do instead, right? They pay you as you go along for retirement. And the worker or the employee in those two situations, in a 401k or 403b, they're expected to go and invest the money and grow it into something and then incur the risk of not running out of retirement money once they retire. For defined benefit pensions, it's the opposite. An employer takes the money, sometimes contributed by the worker, and also in all cases contributed by the employer. They grow that money over time and get it ready for a person's retirement, and then they incur the risk of paying that person in retirement and potentially running out of money and having to pay out of their own pocket instead of from an investment pool.
Okay, so a couple of things there. You threw out the word annuity, and I want to come back to that because that, again, is just another massive question mark when it comes to teachers, particularly when we delve into the 403B world and the Wild West that is in terms of insurance companies offering 403B plans that are basically annuity plans as opposed to an index fund investment. So I would love to come back to annuities at some point. So just so you guys all know at home, we will come back to that. But just so I'm kind of getting it on the most basic kind of idea, as a person works, they are getting part of their salary either deducted and put into like a forced savings into a pension, or the employer is just contributing to a pension on their behalf, and it's still kind of part of your overall compensation. But you have no control over it. You can't really dictate, like, I don't really want to take part in the pension. Is that right?
In many cases, probably in most public spaces, that's going to be the case, that it will be required. Now, in some public spaces for public pensions, that is not the case. It's a choice. Either you participate in a 403B like structure, or you participate in a defined benefit pension structure. In some places, they offer both, so you can do both. But in most public spaces, so teachers, state workers, county, city level, it is mandatory.
Yeah. So I know personally, I have to contribute, I believe it's 7% of my salary. Like when I look at my pay stub, 7% of my salary deducted to go into the pension. So it's technically my pay that's going in there, even though I've never seen that money.
Correct. Right.
And then we also have 403B and 457 options available. So it's one of those things where, yeah, teachers have a ton of options for saving for retirement, just not the income to sometimes make it happen.
Yeah, we can talk about that too, because definitely some of those other investment mechanisms partner really well with the person's defined benefit pension if you do it right.
I think we're probably going to talk about that. Yeah, when we get towards the end of like, all right, let's see how this fits into a FI plan. I think that's when our other vehicles are definitely going to come into play. But so everyone chips into a pot of money. That's who manages this money? Is it the company manages it? Is it dependent on the plan? Is it the state? Is it the federal level? Like who manages this pot of money?
In most cases, both in the corporate world and in the public sector, that money is managed by a trust fund. And that trust fund will typically contract with some type of pension management company to run the pension, to invest the money, to make sure it's grown over time. The trust fund members or the board members will oversee and hopefully ensure that those funds are not frittered away needlessly and that are grown in the manner that they want. It's an extremely complicated industry, fraught with a lot of regulation as well. But at the bottom line, what a teacher would need to know is that there is a trust fund set aside that is supposedly looking out for their best interest by growing this pot of money over time. And don't forget, unlike somebody saving for retirement, pension plans are continually paying out money as they go to the people who have already retired. So they have to worry about the ups and the downs of the market a lot more than someone who is saving for retirement. Writing it out is a lot different for a pension plan than it is for a private individual investor.
Okay. And then is Social Security pretty much the same thing, but on a federal level? Is it just basically a federal pension?
In some ways, yes, but the trust fund that runs Social Security can only invest in certain things. So it's far more restrictive in how they invest that money and try and grow it. But in many ways, Social Security is set up in the same way as a defined benefit pension. I call it the people's pension because it's the one pension, one defined benefit pension-like thing that most American workers still have access to. Although in the teaching world, some pensions, some defined benefit pension plans usurp payments to Social Security and direct those into the pension plan. The government says that when that defined benefit pension pays out, it has to pay out an equal amount of what Social Security otherwise would have, plus whatever the pension would have been from the teacher. But it's important to note, like roughly 25% of public sector employees are not contributing to Social Security because those extra contributions are going into the pension system.
Yeah, and I wish I had that list of states that do that. But yeah, just so you're aware as a teacher, there are some states that you will get a pension and Social Security upon retirement, and there are some where you will not get Social Security because the pension is absorbing that. Yeah, super important to note.
Yeah, that especially comes into play when you're talking about pension safety and how well run that pension system is, because you are potentially pooling risk into one mechanism for retirement, and that's not necessarily how I would, or probably any investment manager or personal finance planner would recommend. You want to spread your risk as much as possible, not pool your risk all in one place.
Yes. And then I guess the problem that Social Security is facing where, we have people who are working chipping into the pot, and then we have people who are retired taking out of the pot, and the pot is no longer growing faster than the money coming out. So the pot is kind of is it getting smaller at this point with Social Security? I think it is.
It is, yeah. So the trust fund is scheduled to run out of money, but then it just becomes pure pay as you go. So today's workers would be then contributing to today's retirees. And so tomorrow's workers would be contributing directly to tomorrow retirees.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that kind of comes back into what, all the congressional mandates and stuff that Social Security and how they invest and what they can invest in, all that kind of comes into play as to why the money's running out. Plus, just the demographics isn't working in the U.S.'s favor.
No. Yeah, the old aging population definitely hurts that balance of more people pulling out than putting in.
True.
Okay, so I want to go into the payout part. And this, I guess, is probably, again, specific to teachers, but I think it is a uniform thing across the board in terms of at what point are we eligible to actually start taking a pension? Is it an age? Is it an amount of time that's put in? And then how much does a pension typically pay out? And I know, like, obviously that definitely varies by person and by state and all that. But if we can get some details as to how to maybe figure that out, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, no problem. I think the first thing we should note is once you get beyond the deferred retirement compensation description of a defined benefit pension and the offer of payments for retirement, which is paid out as an annuity, once you get beyond those two things, every pension then becomes unique. So all pensions are not created equal. In fact, they are created completely differently from one another. So one may not look much like the next. So that's the first thing. However, in most cases, what happens is pension plan sets what's called a normal retirement age. And when that person reaches that normal retirement age, they retire, and then those payments can start. Or there might be a delay between when you can retire and when pension payments start. But typically, in most cases, a pension plan has a normal retirement age, and all that depends. What that age is depends on what kind of job you're in, and therefore, like how long the employer is trying to keep the employee around. Typically, that's somewhere in between the mid-50s and mid-60s. But again, every pension system has its own normal retirement age that it sets according to its own needs.
I think with teachers, it's often not even an age; it's a number of years of service.
It can be. Yeah, a lot. So some pensions are not age-based. Some pensions are years of service based. In fact, most pensions factor in years of service somehow. A lot of times they factor it into the formula that is used to derive how much you're going to be paid in retirement. Mm-hmm. But when you can get access to it or when you can retire is sometimes different and is what is known as the normal retirement age. But yes, you are correct in that many pension systems require a certain certain number of years of service, or they might require either years of service or you be older than a certain age when you retire. So let's say you got a late start of your life in your teaching career and you work from your mid-40s through your mid-60s, And normally the years of service required would be 30 years. Well, they can't keep you working forever. So they have some kind of either or type of situation.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that was kind of a question I had, was like, if you started, at 35 in your teaching career, like, would you be expected to go all the way to 65, or is there a difference? And yeah, there's going to be an age at some point where they're like, okay, we can't keep your pension from you any longer. You're just going to get a smaller pension, probably because you have less years of service put in. And
Correct.
I'm assuming the hope would be that whatever you did in that previous career has either a pension that goes with it, or a 401k or 403b, or you've done something to kind of bridge that gap.
Yes, correct.
All right. Next question. Is a pension taxable income, or is it already tax exempt? Choose your word.
At the federal level, typically in the U.S., pensions are taxed. They are taxed income. So the annuity that pays out. So when your pension starts paying you out, if assuming you select to be paid out in the annuity form, that money is going to be taxed every year, and at the federal level. Now, at the state level, it is state by state dependent, and it even might be more localized than that. But I'll just stick with the state level. In some states, if you are a member of that state's pension plan, which many teachers are, so like, if you're teaching in New York State, maybe you're part of the New York State pension plan. So if you stay in that state in retirement, you're going to get some kind of tax reduction at the state level for your pension. But again, that is state by state. And you can Google which state does this and which state doesn't. It's pretty easy to find it. And then, of course, some states just don't have income tax at all. So if you retire in a state like Washington State or Florida that doesn't have income tax, then you don't need to worry about income tax on your pension in retirement at the state level. But at the federal level, yes, there are very few workarounds. Typically, that is associated with some sort of disability. But more than likely, if that happens, you're going to be receiving Social Security disability. Of course, depends on whether or not you were contributing Social Security or not.
Yes. All right. So is there the option, like Social Security, to defer your pension, and it's then worth more? I guess it's worth more in quotation marks, but the payout per month is a little bit higher. Or is it kind of like you hit the date, you hit the years of service, you separated service from your employer, and now we have to start taking it? Or do you have any autonomy in that sense?
And many pension systems provide autonomy. So much like Social Security, if you delay, your monthly payment gets bigger. Of course, you're working against time, depending on what your longevity is going to be in retirement. But in most cases, there is a choice as to when the pensionable employee / new retiree can decide when to take payments and start payments.
And if I'm right, there is the option of a lump sum payout when you first retire, right?
That is also plan by plan dependent, but yes, many plans nowadays have a lump sum offer attached to it. And some of those lump sums will be full lump sum offers, so you don't get any annuity at all, or some of those offers will be a partial lump sum offer where your annuity afterwards is reduced than what it otherwise would have been. Lump sums are a tricky issue because they pay out in present dollar value. So that is going to be a reduced total amount than what those payments otherwise would have stacked up being in time. And that's due to the present value of money being more valuable than future value of money. So lump sums in and of themselves, you should not go in expecting a lump sum. Like, let's say you calculated your pension payments and it was going to pay out $1 million over what you projected would be a 30-year retirement. If you want to take a lump sum instead, you should not expect $1 million being paid to you. You should expect something significantly less, because you're expected to take that money, invest it, and grow it over time into that $1 million that the pension otherwise would have paid you.
Yeah, and that's kind of, part of the toss-up is it also would depend on your expected lifespan. So if you're thinking for some reason, like I've only got 5 years left, and maybe a lump sum, of course, makes more sense because like I can access the money now. It may not be as much as I would have made over an entire lifetime, but I can access it now and do what I want with it. But yeah, if you take the lump sum, it's going to be worth less than probably the average lifespan with those monthly payments, because at the end of the day, the pension plan wants to break even at least on this.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and there are a whole bunch of federal rules as to that govern pension lump sum offers, and they favor the pension plan in as much as they're able to reduce it potentially even more than what otherwise would be just based off the math.
Gotcha. Okay, so we keep coming back to this word annuity, and I want to make sure that it's very clear, particularly for me, because I'm like still like on the fence about what exactly an annuity is. And even after years of being in the personal finance community, digging into 403Bs, my own pension plan, my own 403B, like it's still like a question mark. So an annuity, from what I understand, is you are paying a fixed amount of money towards this or into this annuity, and they are at this moment in time are promising to pay out a fixed amount of money in the future. So the risk calculation is that the amount of money you put in plus what we think we can grow it by minus your expected lifespan and the payments we're promising, they should still come out ahead. Like it shouldn't be a negative calculation for them. Is that right?
That's pretty much correct. So, the annuity, the payment method is just a vehicle, right?
Okay.
So, the vehicle, as much as you described there, that you are giving someone some money up front. They are doing something with that money, and then they are on the back end, and this is all agreed to in advance, are going to pay you a certain amount of money over time, starting in the future. And of course, the insurance companies who offer annuities, you can go and buy one, yourself as an individual investor, you can go and buy one. They are pooling all that risk of somebody living long with a bunch of people who potentially have a risk of not living very long at all. And so they're somewhat coming out ahead. So not only are they growing that money, but they're going to be winning kind of the death game of people dying earlier than expected, and therefore not having to pay money afterwards. Now, a defined benefit pension uses an annuity as a vehicle, much in that manner to pay people, but it does have some exceptions. One of them is defined benefit pensions have to, by U.S. law, provide survivorship, and that is for a spouse or any designee that a person wants that's within the family, so like their kids. But what's going to happen is your monthly annuity payment is going to be that much less because basically you're paying an insurance premium out of that. So let's say, hey, I want to pass, if I die and I want to pass 50% of my monthly payment onto my wife, I'm going to pay a certain amount of money right up front out of my monthly payment. That's just going to go away to the pension fund as in form of an insurance payment, essentially.
It's almost like a pension for the pension.
Yeah, it's an insurance policy for the pension is essentially what it is, right? And again, so they figure over time they're going to come out ahead on this because some people are going to die earlier than expected. Some may not sign the survivorship papers that need to be signed, which, by the way, according to U.S. law, it must be signed if the person who's getting the defined benefit pension is married. Both the wife and the husband, or the two spouses, whatever the case may be, the two legal spouses must sign and waive that survivorship if they don't want to take it. So it's not like me as a husband who worked in a pensionable area could go and say, no, I don't want survivorship, without my wife actually signing that paper as well. So both spouses have to agree to waive the survivorship. Otherwise, the default is survivorship.
And the question that comes to mind is when a couple separates, what happens then? So if, say, like I'm working, separate from my wife, she would be entitled to my pension unless she signed off on saying like, no, actually, I don't want it?
In certain situations, so divorce gets really complicated with pensions real quick. But yeah, potentially yes. And in some states, it kind of depends on, hey, how long were you married? So how long, like how many years was the spouse around? Why contributions were being made into the pension? Because obviously that spouse is helping out. That spouse may not be working, but maybe that spouse is at home taking care of the kids, and that pension was going to be that spouse's, retirement plan along with the working spouse. So yeah, it gets complicated really quickly. But basically, getting back to annuities and what you need to know about defined benefit pension annuities is they come with some insurance that if you went and bought on the private market, insurance annuities do not. So they are more regulated in that way. And in many cases, they are have some kind of federal regulation that oversees them, as opposed to state regulations overseeing the private insurance industry.
Gotcha. Okay. And guys, I do see your questions popping up, and I have like a small list of them that I've written down here to make sure we come back to. So do make sure you keep including those questions. If I see one that's kind of relevant to exactly what we're talking about at the time, I am going to try and flag it and bring it up. So one question popping up was about the, I guess, quality of the different pension plans, because as we're really starting to figure out, it's not a blanket, everyone's got the same pension. We all have very different pensions. And particularly for teachers, if you're a public school teacher, or even I want to say you work in education, because as someone pointed out, this is not just teachers, administrators are also part of this plan. How do we find out which plans are good, which ones are not? And by good, like, are the benefits going to be different in terms of quality, or are we just talking about like the chances of that pension still being fully funded by the time we need it?
It's both.
Okay.
So it's both. The provisions, the features, the benefits on offer by pension plans vary from plan to plan. And then in the public sector space, which most teacher pensions are, that the safety or how well the pension fund is run and how much contributions they have versus how many current and future payment obligations they have, that quality is measurable as well. And that is quite different from state to state, county to county, things like that. So it very much gets into the what your pension plan provides on or offers as incentives for you to stick around as part of the pension, and then how well it's run on the backside. Those are two different qualitative measurements a teacher needs to make in trying to determine how valuable their pension is. So, and I can run through the list of some of those like features that make a pension more valuable than others if you want.
I would love to hear that.
So one of the first big ones would be cost of living adjustment. So that fights inflation. And not every pension system in the U.S. provides a cost of living adjustment. And if they do, not necessarily everyone provides one that's fully indexed to inflation. So inflation, if you don't have a defined benefit pension that is protected against inflation, what that is going to do is over the lifespan of that retiree, that means the purchasing power gets less and less. So inflation eats away at the purchasing power of that pension unless it's protected somehow. And the way most pensions are protected is through a cost of living adjustment that's typically made on a yearly basis. Although in some states, the state legislatures have to vote if they want to provide a COLA, cost of living adjustment for that year for the state pension systems. So just
to clarify, like if you didn't have that, your pension might say, I'm just going to pick a round number, like $5,000. So your pension pays out $5,000 per month for the rest of your days. But as you get older, $5,000 just buys you less and less and less each year. And if there was a COLA or cost of living adjustment, the 5,000 might become, say, 5,200, 5,500. Like it would increase over time to kind of buy you the same amount of stuff that it would in the beginning.
It would, if it's fully indexed to inflation. Okay. So, and the public pension systems, when it comes to COLA, runs the entire gambit of no COLA at all, partial COLA, COLAs that are only voted on every once in a while, all the way up to fully indexed against CPI, which is the Bureau of Labor and Statistics measurement of inflation each year and each month. So
yes, consumer price index. I think we talked about in the class today, actually.
Yep. Consumer price index. So again, there is a qualitative difference depending on your pension plan and what it offers when it comes to COLAs. Some other features or provisions that might be on offer would be healthcare is the other big one that people often talk about being connected to their pension. Now, it's important you have to view healthcare slightly differently because it's not necessarily connected to the pension itself. It's part of the defined benefit package that is provided to a retiree if they reach normal retirement age. Oftentimes, but not always, the healthcare is funded via a different trust fund than the pension plan. But in some cases, all those funds come out of the same trust fund. So you can see, and everybody probably in the U.S. knows how expensive healthcare is, and a lot of people are working because they get healthcare coverage or working a certain type of job because they do. A lot of people stick around for a pension for healthcare as well, right? Especially if it's on offer. That may not otherwise stick around in that job, let's say, especially if they have healthcare considerations that they already know about.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's a personal concern of mine. The idea of retiring early sounds wonderful, but we are heavily reliant on the public health plan that we get through my job, and going into the private sector for health insurance will be a very expensive thing for us because we do have a lot of pre-existing health conditions that will be coming with us. So yeah, that's definitely a huge question mark that I have in terms of evaluating, could I retire early or not? And not just from a financial point of view, but from like, does it make sense for a quality of life point of view to do that as well?
Yeah. During my master's thesis, I ran a survey, and healthcare came out as the number one provision within a defined benefit pension plan, if folks had access to healthcare via their pension, as the number one reason for sticking around for that pension for everybody but the active duty military folks. So all the other pensionable people that I polled, both state workers, county workers, corporate workers, anybody who had access to a pension, healthcare through their pension system, it was the number one reason why they stuck around. So even more than the payments themselves.
Yeah. So like another one here from Naomi, and I pulled up Tommy's comment as well. Just that it's a question mark. Like I'm doing good financially, but there are these other benefits that go with it. And the assumption, of course, being that our health now is not going to be the same as what it's going to be in retirement. Right. So like, is this something that I really need to consider and weigh in on? And I think, like you said in the very beginning, you guys are going to make an informed choice based on knowing as much as possible about this. It's not a, yes, you need to stay for your pension, or no, you should not, you should leave right now. It's making an informed decision with as much information as possible. And that's one of the goals for tonight, is to give you that little bit of information about the pension that might make that decision a little bit easier, especially for those of you who are kind of on that fence right now of like, should I leave? Should I not? Should I go into the private sector? Should I not? So I'm really appreciating all this so far, Grumpus.
Yeah, so, it's important to point out healthcare is one of those things that is normally connected to the normal retirement age designation of a pension plan. So that is when what in the pension industry is called NRA, in the US, that has a different meaning, but normal retirement age has more than just a connection to when your annuities start or when you qualify to receive that annuity or earn that annuity in full. It is also typically connected to whether or not you qualify for healthcare through your pension plan.
Got it. All right. I've got two questions that are kind of similar, and I want to throw them up now because we kind of have already brushed over this topic, and I don't want to forget these. So Eric asks, if someone's leaving before full retirement, so retiring early, leaving to go to the private sector, whatever the scenario is, should they leave the money in their pension or take it out? And is there like a rule of thumb answer to this, or is it again like you need to evaluate what the pension's going to be worth in X number of years when it does start paying out? Or is there like, if it's before this age, you may as well take it out and invest it?
So again, this is going to be plan by plan, but I get this question a lot, so I have just kind of developed some general rules of thumb. Awesome. And the first one is it depends on how early you retire or how early you stop working before your pension is scheduled to pay out. So in most cases in the U.S., especially from the public side, you actually are vested in your pension plan after 5 years. So that means if you stopped working after year 5, come normal retirement age when pension plan payments are supposed to start, you would get some amount of money. Now, that could be an intervening space of 25 or 35 years. And depending on whether or not the pension plan grows that money over time, would then kind of tell you whether or not it would be worth it to stay within the pension plan or not. A lot of pension plans where if you leave the pension plan early, your money stops accruing value. So in theory, it would be more financially astute to roll that money over into an IRA if that's possible, or a 401k if that's possible, some kind of tax advantaged retirement account, and then manage the money on your own. But of course, that assumes you are going to get an investment return that's going to beat both inflation and the return of what that pension system would get if they were investing the money for you. But the big issue is, the years of service stops when you leave. That's the big issue.
Yeah.
So you would get a pension payment, for working 5 years. 30 years in the future, you might get a pension payment, but it's going to be minuscule compared to what it would have been had you stayed within the pension system itself. And typically, the math doesn't work out in the favor of just letting that money stick around if it's a small amount. And you have a lot of time in between when you stop working in that pension system and when pension payments are supposed to start. So general rule of thumb, if you're less than halfway, to the point of retirement and you haven't built up a sizable amount of value within that because you don't have the years of service, typically speaking, if the value is small, just roll it over. Now, you want to make sure you're not going to incur some sort of tax implications from that, because not necessarily every pension allows you to roll it over into a tax advantage account. That is also plan by plan. So if it doesn't allow you to roll it out into some tax advantage account, then your calculation gets a lot more complicated, because then you got to figure out what the tax implications are and all that. But generally, again, most pension systems, if you have a small amount, your years of service are small, allow you to roll it over.
Yeah, my wife and I faced that actual same scenario. She worked in the school system as a school therapist for, I think, 3 years. So wasn't vested. And what's the difference, I guess, between being vested and not vested? Let's actually go there, because I had that written down as a question mark.
So vested means you're going to get some payment at some point in the future. So you've qualified to earn payments. If you are not vested, that means you have not qualified to earn payments in the future.
So what happens to your money?
Normally, if you left, you would get it back. Again, not always, but normally, if you left, you would get it back, your contributions back. But you wouldn't get any of the value that had grown on those contributions during those 3 years.
So yeah, it's been growing for those 3 years, but until you hit that vested point, you don't get to count that, basically. Like it's not yours.
Correct.
So they're kind of saying we need at least X number of years of time. All right, so that makes sense. Yeah, my wife only had 3,000 or something in her pension at the point when she left, and we just rolled that into her traditional IRA, because a pension is pre-tax money. Is that right?
In many cases, yes, but not in all cases. I think probably for the public sector, that's going to be the large majority are going to be pre-tax. But in the corporate world, that's not necessarily the case.
Okay, and then we had another question about on payouts. So Jay asked, does the IRS impose additional 10% taxes on early distributions if you retire before 55? So can you get your money out of the pension early?
It depends on what the pension plan has set up for its rules.
Okay,
there's not a penalty if a pension plan starts paying out at 55. There's not going to be any penalty on that payment. If that's what their retirement age is set for, and you reach all the requirements to receive your money, there's not going to be any kind of early penalty that the federal or state government puts on it, because that is what the pension plan was set up to pay out on. Now, remember, you're just going to pay normal tax on it at the federal level, at least, and then, like we said, state by state dependent. But no, if you retire early and start receiving payments, so a lot of pension plans, this should be something else we talk about. Much like Social Security, there's a normal retirement age or a normal age when the payments would start, when your annuity would start, but there's also a certain number of years before that you could start early payments. But if you elect that, just as in Social Security, you're electing a reduced amount permanently for the rest of your retirement. So
yeah, because they're spreading out the total amount they thought they were going to pay you over more time.
Correct. Exactly. So, again, the math needs to work in their favor. If the pension plan, for instance, in this question is 55, that's the normal retirement age when payments would start. But let's say there's early eligibility to start payments at 51. A lot of pension plans will slap a 7 or 8% reduction for each year.
Wow.
4 times 7, that's what, 28. So you're permanently electing a 28% reduction in your monthly payments forever.
So they don't really want you to touch it early.
Correct. So you have to understand it from the perspective of the employer. They are trying to disincentivize people leaving early. They have decided that 55 is the year that works best for their workforce. And they want to make sure that you have all the incentive to stay around for it. And then they also want to make sure you have all the incentive to leave afterwards too. So it gets really complicated if people work beyond normal retirement age, because values can accrue so much quicker at that end of the scale. They're trying to give you a push out a door. So a normal retirement age is both a pull up to that point and then a push afterwards. So you pull to keep you into that job and then a push to get you out of that job when you hit the normal retirement age.
Okay. And just to make sure that we are fully answering Jay's question, say yes, there is an early retirement eligibility age. What about before that? Is it possible, say at 40 years old, to retire early and actually start withdrawing from your pension? Or is it kind of you can't touch that money?
No, unless you somehow reach the requirements a different way. So, but again, this is all plan to plan dependent.
Yeah.
For me in the U.S. military, the only requirement was 20 years. It wasn't age based, and it wasn't age based for when I could retire, nor was it age based for when my retirement payments would start. Mm-hmm. So, I have an immediate payout pension. I retired at 20, and the next month my pension started paying out. Not every pension does that. In fact, very few do that in the U.S. anymore. But it all depends on what the pension plan's rules that it was set up by say. If it says you can receive early payments up to 10 years before normal retirement age, then you could do it. But if it doesn't say that, then you should not expect to get any payments before either the early payments eligibility point or the full payments eligibility point.
Okay, so similar to 401k, 403b, you are going to have to bridge that gap to pension payouts, traditional retirement, that 59 and a half age or 55, whatever it is. If you were going to retire early, you got to have a plan for bridging your way to that, because getting the money out early is just, in the pensions case, it doesn't sound like it's very easy to do at all, versus a 401k. Yeah, you can take your money out, but you're going to pay an extra fee on top of it, plus all the income tax as well.
Right. The only wild card in that explanation would be if they offer you a lump sum. Typically, the lump sum is offered when you sign the papers, that you're quitting or you're retiring. Oh. So you might be able to get it out that way if that's your real intention. Of course, you're waiving any eligibility to receive pension payments in the future by doing that.
Okay. Good to know.
So that it's an interesting niche in the pension world.
Yeah.
That lump sums are really the only way you get portability out of a pension system that isn't like a statewide pension system. And I know that's probably one of the questions people have, hey, if I'm a teacher and I stop working in one district and start working in another, what's that do to my pension? Well, it all depends on how widespread the pension plan is. If it's a statewide plan, switching districts probably won't do anything. It may restart your years of service, so you need to look into that, but it doesn't necessarily, disqualify you from getting the pension being part of that pension system and therefore getting a bigger pension in the future by continuing to work. Now, if you switch states, you can call that off. If you're in a county plan as a teacher, or if you're in a city plan as a teacher, and you move to a different city, even within that state, then you might be moving to a different pension plan. So therefore, you need to take that consideration into account when you decide to move.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of people doing that. I know in Maryland, it's a state pension plan. So I think all of our counties are on the same state pension plan. So moving within counties does keep you on the same pension track. I don't know about that reset of years of service, though. That's a really interesting question. I would hope that it wouldn't, but you never know.
Yeah, if you're in the same tier, I wouldn't see where that year of service would switch or reset. By moving, so this is another thing. A lot of state pension plans and even some kind of larger city plans have different tiers, and you should always consider the higher you go up in tiers, the less generous it gets, because governments over time have been reducing the benefits connected to those pensions because they're so expensive to run.
Yes.
And they run into budget crunches when you have something like the Great Financial Crash. You have a whole bunch of state and city governments that went into immediate deficit and had to figure out a way to kind of reduce a lot of that deficit. So if you are in a state with multiple tiers in the pension plan, and you're thinking about switching jobs, it is very important that you determine whether or not by switching jobs you are switching tiers or making yourself ineligible for the tier that you are in, and therefore having to start at the newest tier, the most recent tier, because that is essentially like starting over in many cases.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's so important. And I think another thing you brought up, like about the Great Recession, or even in our most recent global pandemic, I think doesn't every pension, or I guess if it's a state pension, the state has the option of not funding that pension that current year and basically promising to catch up on it. Like they could divert those funds into other uses. Yeah,
that is what happens. State, county, local. A lot of that happens on the public sector. That wouldn't necessarily happen in the private sector. And essentially what they are doing is trying to plug the budget for that year with the money that otherwise would have gone into the pension system. So when you hear someone saying like, hey, California is robbing the pension system, it doesn't mean they're going over to the trust fund and actually withdrawing money. That is not what they're talking about. What they are talking about is that the money that otherwise would have been contributed by the state of California for that year is not going into the pension fund for that year, and they're going to promise to catch up in the future. And all that does is make their future annual payments that much bigger. The actuarians go in and figure out how much bigger that's got to be in the following years. Even then, state governments often struggle meeting those requirements. So that's how you get these compounding years of not paying into the pension fund. That is how you get state, local, city, county pension funds that are so poorly funded.
Yeah, a lot of people did this with their personal finance as well. In 2020, they said, I'm not going to contribute to my IRA right now. I'm going to divert that money into my budget because my salary got deducted a little bit. I lost some hours. I decided not to go back to teaching because I was, fearful for my own health or for just health reasons. And basically kind of like saying, well, I'll commit to funding 2020's IRA and 2021's IRA in 2021. So you would have to put in double the amount. And even then you still lose the interest that would have been gained over the time because you can't over contribute to the 2020 IRA.
Right. And so within many pension systems around the U.S., the public ones specifically, again, demographics is not working in their favor. So every year they miss a payment, that's less money that they're going to be getting from the current workers to invest in the future because you just have simply less workers around.
And I think you threw out a stat on the ChooseFI podcast. I'll put the link up for that in a second. So when you were interviewed on ChooseFI, I think it was if a pension is 75% funded, like where it's supposed to be, like that's actually considered a good thing. Like that's a good pension at that point.
So there is this mythical 80% mark that many pension systems have started shooting for as what they consider being fully funded. The American Academy of Actuaries has come out and said, hey, that has no actuarial endorsement, right? Their policy or their recommendation is that pension funds should strive for 100% funded against current and future obligations. And almost no public pension system within the U.S. is currently funded at 100% or more. It didn't necessarily used to be that way before the internet bubble, and different accounting methods that were used in the 90s and the 80s. A lot of state, public, county, local pension plans were funded at 100%. There was an accounting change that happened to coincide with the dot-com bust. And ever since then, the trend has been slowly downwards for some pension systems or drastically downwards for other pension systems.
And that comes to the question on the screen. Do you know offhand which pensions are actually pretty well funded? I think the 75 was coming from me thinking about Maryland. I think I looked this up after your interview and I was like, okay, Maryland's at 75. It's not too far from 80, but any other ones off the top of your head that are particularly well funded or not?
Yeah, a few years ago, I wrote an article. I think like New York State and a couple other ones were in the 90s. That is all easily Googleable,
okay.
Google searchable. And then also, and I said this on the ChooseFI podcast as well, like my main resource for a lot of the public pension questions I get asked is the Center for Retirement Research's Public Plans database. So if you go to the Public Plans database at the Center for Retirement Research, they have all the large state-run systems listed. They have many of the large county and municipal ones listed as well. There are over 5,000 public pension systems in the U.S., so they can't have everyone, but they have a lot of the major ones. And within that, they make calculations of, that's their sample, and then they extrapolate that to, hey, at the public pension funds this year for all public pension plans are at, 72% is the average of funding or whatever.
Okay. And just on the topic of Google, I put the episode link up for when Grumpus was on the ChooseFI podcast. I think it was the second time you came on because you've been on twice, right?
I have actually. I've been on a few more times, but I've been on twice specifically,
as a dedicated episode. Yeah. Okay, so the most recent one I think is episode 227. That's the episode I was referencing where we dug a little bit into. I say we, you and Brad and Jonathan dug into a lot of the nuances in terms of like figuring out how well funded a pension is. And the other thing you can also Google is how to calculate your own pension. And a couple of you have said that in the comments that it is a formula. And Grumpus, maybe you want to talk more about this. Like, where does each person, or how could each person potentially figure out like, what is my pension worth and how is it calculated?
Right. So most pensions are calculated via a formula. So, to determine the amount of money that's going to be paid as an annuity each month or each year, there is a pension formula that should be either on the website of the pension plan or in the papers you originally signed for employment, or in the annual newsletter, or hopefully in all those places, that tells you what the formula is to calculate. That formula typically involves some years of service multiplied by a multiplier. It's like a valuable multiplier. And what happens is, so say in the U.S. military, it was 2.5% for every year served. So you take 20 years, you multiply it by 2.5%, that equals 50%. That's what you get of your pension. 50% of your paycheck is what you get as your pension. So there is some kind of formula that's going to include years of service, this value multiplier, and then also what's your some average of final salary, or it could just be your last year final salary, although that's less common these days. Typically, it's a 3 to 5 year average of your highest paid salary throughout your career, or your final years, because final years typically is where you make the most, anyways.
Yes.
So yeah, that's how a formula works. So they have kind of those three components. You have years of service, you have your value multiplier, and then you have what your salary was, and you crunch that out, and out comes your number. You're going to get 50%. You're going to get 35% of your final 3 years of salary, something like that. So that's how it's figured out. Now, that is what you're looking for as a first step when you're trying to figure out what your pension will be worth. Now, hopefully, many pension systems do. Hopefully, yours does. It has a calculator that allows you just to plug all that in on the website, and then boop, out comes your number. And some are even fancy enough where they say, hey, what year are you going to retire at? And then it will do some sort of pension, some inflation calculations along with that, right?
Nice.
That is the best place to go and get, a quick determination of what your pension is going to pay out on a monthly or annual basis. Now, that does not mean total value of your pension, right? As we spoke about before, you would then have to kind of you would have to take and compile, what it would pay each year, and then do some inflation calculations if your pension is subject to inflation. And then you would get some kind of rough measurement of how much over time your pension would pay you for, a 30-year retirement span or a 25-year retirement span, whatever you expect your longevity to be in retirement. And so that would be, the value of your pension in a dollar form.
Yeah. And I would add into that, if you're still a little confused, you're like, I still don't know where to go. Your HR office, this is one of the things that they can actually talk to you about. Like, I know when it comes to the 403B, my HR office is a very difficult one to deal with, because they're like, here's your options. We can't give you any more information about that because it might be construed as us kind of like guiding you in some way. Yep. Pension, they can give you a bit more information because there is just the pension and they have no way to influence what you're doing with that. So if you are having questions, get on your school district's website, potentially find out who your HR representative is that deals with benefits, and they should be able to point you in the right direction or even walk you through doing the calculation itself.
Yeah. And so you should definitely do that. HR is always a great first stop for a pension question like that. The other thing, though, I would say is just make sure they do the calculation correctly. Find out how to do the calculation and then double check it, because this is, especially if it's time to retire, you don't want to make the mistake of signing pension papers that say we're going to pay you this amount, only to come to find out that that they did the calculation wrong and that you should have gotten more.
Yeah. And actually, Naomi raises a good point that I know in my school district, the 403B providers and basically the ones who are going to rip you off are the ones who will come into your staff lounge. They're the ones who will have the extra money lying around because you're overpaying to put on these free webinars for you. If you're getting one about pensions, it might be a different story. If the state pension agency is putting it on, or somebody who you think is actually a non-biased body is putting it on. Now, I know my insurance company providers will still put on pension webinars, and I'm sure that they are lacing that in with, just come do our 403B. But just look out for those. Your district is probably sending those out to you on a regular basis. Most of the time, I think teachers ignore them. But have a look. If you see one about pensions, it might be worth going to if you feel like the actual management company is doing it or HR is doing it, and they're just going to give you good information.
Yeah, I see someone in the comments recommended reaching out to their teacher union. That would be another great place to get information, especially, especially because unions are so often associated with pensions anyways. That's often they have some expertise built up within unions that you otherwise wouldn't find in other places.
All right. One other question. I know we're at the top of the hour, guys, and I don't want to keep us much longer. Day asked, can the terms of a current pension be changed? So is it a case of the moment I started working in my teaching profession and I signed the contract that my pension was locked in at the current whatever rates were set, or is that something that can still be changed?
This is a state-by-state answer, unfortunately. Some states have very strong employment law that basically consider that contract you sign as written in stone. So even if they had to change the pension tiers, you would not be changed. California would be one of those states with state employment laws that are very strict in this regard. So I'm very much in favor of the employee. Other states, not so much. And they do have the ability to go in and rewrite the terms of the pension and potentially punch you into a different tier if you're not over a certain number of years of service. Often it's, if you've vested after your 5-year mark, you're safe, but not always. It is a state-by-state issue. And also you have to realize some of the other benefits like healthcare that's packaged within a defined benefits package, that could potentially come and go because it is not treated the same in some states as the agreement to pay you money in form of a pension. So that is sometimes, you're at the mercy of what state law is. And it just depends on how strong in favor of the worker state employment laws are.
Okay. So, I mean, tons of great information. I want to put that kind of final bow on it and talk about where does a pension fit into someone's retirement plan? So kind of talking specifically to teachers, most of us have a 403B and potentially a 457 available, a pension, question mark on Social Security. Is there any kind of tips, advice in terms of how to manage all of those together, or any big questions that you normally get around it?
Yeah, so I typically get kind of 3 questions around pensions that are kind of unique to pension members as opposed to non-pension retirees. So 457B is a great example of an investment investment vehicle that complements retiring early and earning a pension, right? Because the withdrawal rules for 457 are so much different than a lot of the other retirement vehicles that if you wanted to retire early and bank kind of on your pension starting at, like 62, and you want to retire at 55, if you've built up enough money in your 457B, you can get access to that money almost right away in many cases. And use that money to live off of until your pension starts, right? So that is not the case for 401ks and kind of what's on the corporate side of the world, right? You have 59 and a half if you don't want to pay that 10% penalty. So in many cases, kind of teachers, especially since they often seem to be offered things like 457Bs, have a method that they could enact an early retirement if they're able to get enough money into those vehicles, right? So you already mentioned 7% of my paycheck is coming out on top, going immediately into my pension payment. Once I pay the bills and everything else, there may or may not be enough money left over to go into a 457. On top of that, many 457s are poorly managed, and you get, they're a ripoff essentially because the choices aren't great. They're high cost investments with a lot of transaction fees, stuff like that. Especially in the public sector where maybe knowledge of this thing, things like, investment fees and stuff like that isn't as well known as it should be. 457 may not be the best place to actually put your money, even if you could get access to it before 59 and a half without a penalty, right?
Yes. And so that's where like other strategies like the Roth IRA could potentially bridge that gap as well if you needed to, because at least you can get those contributions out.
Yes. And that is what I did as well. I didn't have access to a 457B in the military, but I put a ton of money away into the Roth. And then also, taxable investment account would be the other option, right? Yeah. So you can only put so much money into a Roth per year, and you can only withdraw the contributions before 59 and a half, not the interest that's accrued or the compounded investment that's accrued. But you certainly can out of a taxable account, right? And there's no penalty there. You've already paid the taxes. You're paying those taxes, ongoing. You'll have to pay long-term capital gains tax if you have a lot of capital gains, but those are typically a lot lower than income tax. So, you are kind of coming out ahead there too. So, oftentimes the money issue of like, hey, how much money am I getting with my pension? Can I kind of ladder this into early retirement? The money issue isn't typically the problem. Typically the problem is the healthcare. And that is the big question mark. And if your healthcare qualification is that you work to normal retirement age, well, you're kind of stuck working for the healthcare unless you can figure out a cheaper way to pay for it in retirement. If you want to retire early, so that's one of the biggest questions that I see. The U.S. federal workers are completely caught up in this issue because their restrictions for when healthcare coverage starts, the age restriction, the qualification for it is so strict that there's hardly any way to hack around it. And of course, in the financial independence space, people love to kind of hack their way into early retirement, right? So, I see someone said, hey, the ACA is very affordable. Now, that's great. Things like that help the worker out, make retiring on a pension easier, especially make early retirement on a pension easier than they otherwise would have been. But yeah, so that's one of the main questions I get. The other one is, what kind of specific things do I need to worry about as a person with a pension, or maybe even a teacher with a pension? And one of the things I would point out is, and this came out in my thesis study as well, is that teaching is a female-dominated industry, and pension issues for women are unfortunately different from men. In women's favor, they're on average, they live longer than men in the U.S. at least. So if you have access to a pension and you work up till a normal retirement and retire, you can expect to live longer and collect more pension payments than your male counterpart. But there's a big problem within pensionable jobs, especially like teachers, is many women don't reach normal retirement age. For a lot of different social reasons, and I think the pandemic in the past year has kind of highlighted a lot of those structural issues within the U.S. that tend to make women quit their jobs more often than men in order to take care of the household or take care of elderly parents or whatever it is. Those pressures fall on women a lot more than men. So women are at a disadvantage when that happens, even if they're able to return to the same job in the future and still be in the same pension system in the future. They miss out a lot of years, or they end up leaving earlier than they otherwise would have, and therefore their pension value is a lot less than it otherwise would have been. So, women.
Yeah, a couple of things there. Like, you have lower salary because you haven't moved up as many salary lanes or steps on the ladder. You contributed less to the pension. You might have less years of service. Yeah, there's just so many ways that your pension can be diminished. And same thing with your 403b, potentially with your IRA as well. So yeah, it's certainly a part of our system that I think our female counterparts need to be very aware of.
Yeah. And I think this is something I intend to write about in the future on my blog as well, awesome. Because it's such a clear kind of signal that came out of my research, is that, in specific cases, the situation is truly different for women than it is for men. As I found out from a little preview for everybody, as I found out, men typically stay no matter kind of what the case, whereas females were, at least my survey, females who took my survey showed that they left at a statistically significant number. And that was a consistent signal at a statistically significant level that came out of my research. So some quick highlight from my thesis that I hope to put into a blog, maybe a book in the future.
And on that note, tell us more about your writing, because you do have a book. I know we've talked about a lot of things tonight, but there is no way we've covered the entire contents of a book. So what can people find in there? Who should be going to pick up this book? Is it applicable to teachers? Is it just for military people with pensions? Tell us a little bit more about it.
So the book itself is a how-to guide, and it's a how-to guide for anybody with a pension to determine if staying for the pension is worth it. I call that the Golden Albatross decision point. It's an inflection point that many pensionable workers hit, much like myself. I kind of hit mine late in my career. A lot of people hit that point earlier for a lot of different reasons. But the book is meant to help you through that point, or even prepare for that point even. So it kind of walks you through a lot of the emotional and social considerations that you have to make as a pensionable worker as to whether or not this job is good for me. Is it right for me? Is it healthy for me? That type of thing, versus all the things that the pension offers like healthcare, like a COLA, like those, consistent payments in retirement. So it helps you through that, as well as it also helps you actually go and put a rough order of magnitude dollar value on your pension. It shows you how to do that as well. And that's different for, if you have an inflation fighting COLA versus if you don't. It kind of it walks you through whatever that scenario is and helps you. And so, yeah, that was published by ChooseFI July of 2020. So it's been out for almost a year now. And yeah, so if you're a teacher and you want to learn more about your pension, because it's a great way to kind of learn the basics, and B, want to start getting proactive about whether or not your pension's really worth it. It also helps you teach you how to assess your pension, especially from the safety point of view. Like how much can I rely on this pension in the future? Is it going to pay through in at the dollar value that it says it's going to? And so, at least from the teacher point of view, in many cases, being public employees, a lot of that is a lot stronger of a contract than would otherwise be on the corporate side. And basically, state governments can raise taxes and in order to pay for those obligations, and we've seen that happen time after time. So the safety consideration for a teacher often comes down to a different set of considerations than it would be if you were on the corporate side and it was just one corporation paying into a pension fund.
Gotcha. And where can people find this book? I have a couple of the sources I found online. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, Bookshop. Is there anywhere else that they can find your book?
Nook. So it's Audible now as well. So we have the audio book. You got the printed hard copy, the printed paperback copy. You find it at most major booksellers online, at least. And then you can find it on the ChooseFI webpage. If you just Google ChooseFI books, all the books that have been published by ChooseFI are on there, mine included. And then, or you can find it at my webpage. I have a page dedicated to it as well.
And what is your site?
GrumpusMaximus.com.
Awesome.
Yep, pretty easy. And the blog site is called the Golden Albatross, so you can Google that if you want as well, and that will pop right up. And you'll find all my blog posts there. My book was based on many of my blog posts. It's just one concise place to get access to all that in one easy read, or at least that's what people have told me. It's fairly easy read.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well. I've yet to get to it, but I keep hearing like it's an easy read. It's not what you think. Like it's not a dense book about pensions that's going to bore you to tears. Like it actually is something that is readable, puts it in a language that you can understand. And that's something that I'm looking for in a book about something like this. Like as you guys saw tonight, like I did not know a ton about pensions coming in here. And I feel like I've learned a lot because Grumpus, you're able to break it down into at least easy to understand bites. And we dove into what some of the vocabulary meant, what some of the things to consider are, and there is more. And there's a lot more. And I know we did not get to everyone's questions tonight, but I want to be very respectful of Grumpus's time. And we will definitely have follow-ups as well.
That's all right, man. I love talking about this stuff. You want to nerd out on pitches for 5 more hours, I'm ready. Yeah, the one thing I would say about the book is it is a much better read than my thesis. Like I wouldn't recommend my thesis to anybody unless you want to fall asleep. The book, on the other hand, I think it would keep you awake and engaged in a topic that otherwise could be rather dry. The other thing I'd say is, I have a Facebook group specifically
awesome.
for pensionable workers as well as pensionable retirees. So, we, much like ChooseFI, we kind of crowdsource people's answers to people's questions. The name of that Facebook is called the Golden Albatross / Golden Handcuffs. And it's a friendly environment, very non-toxic, and people come with questions of all types and varieties about pensions. And I learn a lot just by, engaging with those folks as well.
I put that in the chat. Golden Albatross / Golden Handcuffs Facebook group. Definitely get in there and join it. Grumpus, I hope we can convince you to come in and join the ChooseFI Educators group as well, just in case any questions pop up there. But
yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time tonight. We appreciate your experience and the fact that somebody has taken the time to niche down into pensions and is willing to share that information and is entertaining enough to actually listen to about it. All of those things is probably a very hard thing to find. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thanks. Thanks for your time.
Of course. And for those of you listening, ChooseFI will be having more conversations with Grumpus on different pension niches. So we'll probably have one about military. I'm guessing we'll have one for other public workers as well. Stay tuned for those. We will get that message out. If you registered for this webinar, we've got your email. We will let you know when further conversations with Grumpus are coming up. But thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you at least learned something. You got some of your questions answered. and you know where to go to find more information. That was always the key, is helping to inform you how to find more and how to make a better decision moving forwards.
Hey, Rob, the one thing I'd point out is that the Houses of Fi episode that I did with ChooseFI,
Yes.
with the couple from Virginia, she was a teacher, so I was analyzing her pension specifically. So if you want to see like the techniques I use to kind of break down a pension real quick, that is a great episode, especially if you're a teacher.
Any chance you know the episode number off the top of your head?
I don't, unfortunately. It wasn't that long ago. It came out in April.
I think I have it. Is it 241 with Troy and Lindsay?
Yes, it is. That's the one.
Okay, so let me put that in the chat. Thank goodness they number all of their episodes. Okay, so ChooseFI.com/241 should give you that episode and the show notes and everything that would go with that as well. All right, thank you all for joining us tonight. Feel free to keep contributing to the conversation in the comments. Tag people who you think might be interested in seeing the replay. The replay will be available as soon as we end this broadcast. And share any future thoughts, questions, feedback. We would love to hear from you. Feedback@ChooseFI.com. All right, have a great night.
Thanks for everybody tuning in. I appreciate it.